How much of an impact does my bike commute have on climate change? That's the question we're exploring on today's video. Hey everyone, I'm Tom and this is Shifter, a channel about urban cycling, bike commuting, and the ways we get around our cities. And if you like videos like this, please consider subscribing. So yes, I'm currently hauling a folding bike inside a cargo bike, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about a question I've wondered about for a long time. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer that riding a bike is good for the environment. But over the years, I've actually wondered, like, how much does me riding my bike to work every day actually reduce my carbon footprint? And the cursory research I've done over the years proves this to be kind of a more nuanced and complicated question than I thought. And so when faced with this question, I did what I usually do when I have complicated questions. I got someone smarter than me to help. So I invited Kaylin Klingbeil back. She's a great journalist and researcher who's helped me out on a couple of videos to sort of look deep into this question and help me assess my own carbon impact. And yep, she proved me right. This was a much more nuanced and complicated question than I thought. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into it. Okay, back by popular demand. Welcome back, Kaylin.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming back. Whenever I have a really hard question that I can't fathom figuring out myself, I call Kaylin. So thank you for doing this.
So ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Let's do it. How much difference does my bike commute make to climate change?
So let's start with looking closer at how greenhouse gas emissions from various human activities cause climate change.
Right. Okay,
No
we're
big deal.
going right back to the beginning. Yeah. Okay.
Let's start with you and what do you do in your daily life that contributes to climate change?
Right. Okay. That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I sent you to carbonfootprint.com.
You did send me there, yes.
where you can enter in those details, like you mentioned, your household energy consumption, your travel habits, right down to sort of recent flights you've taken, the annual mileage driven in the vehicle, your vehicle make, as well as trips on public transport. So those numbers all make up your primary carbon footprint.
Absolutely.
So according to this website, carbonfootprint.com, the average Canadian's carbon footprint is 15.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It's a little lower in the United States, 15.24 tons, and for the European Union, it's 6.8 tons.
Yeah, that number is sort of crazy to me, how much higher we are than Europe and even higher than the US. But I guess when you think about it, we're a big, cold, rich country and we drive everywhere. Right?
And we consume a lot.
We consume a lot, yeah. So I guess it does fit.
Yeah, and the average worldwide carbon footprint is about 4.79 tons. So I asked you to calculate your footprint and you entered in all of those numbers. What did you come up with?
So I did it originally based on if I was driving my car every day. So I imagined if I didn't have a bike, this is what it would be, and it came out to 13.6. So slightly lower than the Canadian average, which is good, I guess, but still like unfathomably high for the rest of the world. So I don't know how to feel. I think part of it was like I did a couple of international flights this year, which seems to like really push your number up, and it's like if you fly anywhere internationally, it's hard to recover from that, I think. So yeah. 13.3. So I don't know how to feel. I feel slight shame, but also, hey, I'm also like, I'm not the worst.
There was no spot to enter in biking.
Yeah.
And that's because of biking's very low carbon footprint, which I will talk a little bit more about in a second.
Right. And I did calculate what it would be, the change that would be if I rode my bike every day, which is what I actually do. But you got to wait for that because there's more. You wanted to get into more detail before we like reveal that number. There's more to talk about.
For sure.
Okay, so we established that I am not that green if I was to drive my car every day. But let's like back up again and say like, just how good is cycling for the environment? Like, what are the benefits of cycling?
There's sort of a go-to number here that gets cited, and it comes from a major 2011 study from the European Cyclist Federation that takes into account the environmental cost to manufacture a bike, as well as the extra calories consumed by the rider to power the bike.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
We're going into that much detail?
So their, more on that in a moment,
Okay.
but their calculation was 21 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilometer for a bike,
21 grams. Okay.
and 22 for an e-bike. And so note that those numbers are based on the emissions for food production in the European Union. and the carbon intensity of food does vary greatly. The same research found a bus emits about 101 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per passenger kilometer.
Per passenger.
So it breaks down to per passenger.
So 21 to 100. So that's significantly different.
And a car emits about 271 grams
Oh, wow.
Per passenger kilometer.
Right.
And so there's been more recent research in this area from the International Transport Forum. And they sort of dive deep onto new mobility, so things like private and shared e-bikes and e-scooters and ride sharing, to ask about those sort of impacts. And then they also considered the type of buses or cars or even mopeds, if they're hybrid electric vehicles, internal combustion engine, all of that sort of stuff. So
This is the
I
chart
shared
you
a
asked me to
chart with
bring?
you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So look how much detail they have in there.
So these are all the different modes.
Yeah,
transportation.
So an estimate of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of urban transport modes per kilometer. So the biggest one here is actually a taxi.
A taxi? Oh, interesting.
But yeah, taxi is your high one, and ride sourcing or ride sharing cars
like an
as
Uber.
well.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And so this research, if you go down to these very, very low numbers, it found that private bikes and e-bikes that are regularly used have the lowest life cycle energy requirements and greenhouse gas emission impacts per kilometer of any urban transport mode.
All right, that's what I'm talking about.
So go bicycle.
Go bicycles.
And another way to think about this question of how green is cycling, is to think about the carbon saved. So the United Nations Environment Program, again, sort of a commonly cited number, says switching from a car to a bicycle saves 150 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometer.
Okay.
So you add that up, every 7 kilometers traveled by bike will save emissions of just over 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide compared to the same distance covered by car.
Right.
And again, these savings add up. So Christian Brand, a professor at the University of Oxford, has delved deeply into this topic, sort of looking at this at like a broader level, specifically the travel patterns of people living in 7 European cities. So Brand and his co-authors found people who cycled on a daily basis had 84% lower carbon emissions from all their daily travel than those who didn't.
From their daily travel, 84%. That's a big number, yeah.
And he estimates that urban residents who switch from driving to cycling for just 1 trip per day reduce their carbon footprint by about half a ton of carbon dioxide over the course of a year.
Right. So it's not an all or nothing. Any riding you do can help.
Yeah. And so his estimate is that if just 1 in 5 urban residents permanently change their travel behavior in this way over the next 5 years, it would cut emissions from all car travel in Europe by about 8%.
8%.
So it adds up.
It does add up. Wow. It's like a slam dunk. Like what more do we have to discuss here?
We have more to discuss.
More to discuss? Okay, I knew it was going to be that simple. Okay. Well, this has sounded good so far. Let's move on.
Okay.
Okay, so we just established that riding your bike is great for the climate, like in lots of different ways. It can make a significant impact, but it's not that simple, right? It also has to do with where you live.
Yeah, and your community and community-wide emissions as well. So let's look a little more broadly at Calgary, where we both live.
So those who don't know, Calgary is a city of about 1 million people here in Western Canada.
And we are the biggest city in Alberta, and we're also Canada's largest oil and natural gas producer, which will come into play.
All those towers back there, paid for with oil money.
The city of Calgary tracks the amount of greenhouse gas emissions added to the atmosphere through activities that happen within city boundaries.
Right.
And so I showed you what our city's greenhouse gas emissions looked like in 2021.
Oh, the other chart.
Yes. Another chart.
Okay.
So you can sort of tell that diesel and gasoline used in personal and fleet vehicles in Calgary accounted for 34% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city. What I thought was interesting was what else this graph shows. That 65% of greenhouse gas emissions in Calgary come from the energy used across all of Calgary's buildings, and it's residential and commercial. So that's heating, cooling, lighting, and power in residential, commercial, and industrial buildings.
Right, that's a lot. It's bigger than I would have expected.
Than transportation.
Yeah,
and so it's helpful here to talk just a little bit about the electricity grid.
Sure. We're getting deep now.
In 2022, according to the Alberta Electric System Operator, 72.5% of total electricity generation came from natural gas, followed by renewable generation at 12.6%, and then coal at 12.4%.
Right.
And this was the first time ever that renewable power from wind, solar, and hydro generated more electricity than coal in Alberta. So Alberta's rapid phase-out of coal-fired power plants by the end of this year, well ahead of a 2030 federal target, is considered the biggest greenhouse gas reduction in Alberta's history.
Oh, wow. So we're talking big numbers now.
Yeah.
Like riding my bike is good, but these are like the big numbers.
Yeah, totally. And we still have a long ways to go to decarbonize our electricity grid. And this is where it's sort of interesting to look at other provinces as well. So you can take a quick look at the Canadian Energy Regulator's provincial energy profiles. The most recent I saw was 2019 numbers. So in our neighboring province, BC, about 87% of electricity was produced from hydroelectric sources.
Right.
That number is even larger in Canada's largest province. About 92% of electricity was produced from zero carbon sources. In those provinces with greener electricity grids, a city's community-wide greenhouse gas emissions are going to look different than Calgary's,
right.
But you're still holding nicely here.
Yes.
And
I do have a function here, yes.
And therefore lowering emissions from transportation may be prioritized differently. And I showed you another chart, which was Vancouver's emissions in 2021, just to sort of give you an idea of another city.
So this is Vancouver.
Yeah, and so you can see electricity makes up a much smaller portion than in Calgary. So remember, Calgary was 34% was sort of vehicles, and then Vancouver's number is 55% for buildings. Calgary,
Right.
that was much higher at 64%. So again, Vancouver's going to make different choices on a citywide level than Calgary is to meet emissions targets. And in Vancouver, to meet 2030 emission reduction targets, they aim to have 2/3 of daily trips in the city taken by active transportation and transit, and half of kilometers driven on their roads be by zero emission vehicles.
Because in Calgary, a bigger proportion of our energy is spent on heating buildings.
Yeah.
It makes more sense for us to focus on that, whereas in Vancouver, the priorities are just different because they're spending more greenhouse gas emissions on other things.
Sure, yeah,
Right.
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So every city is going to sort of have a pie or a graph like this one.
Is there a name for this
Of that emissions breakdown. And that's going to lead them to make different decisions. So just for example, Calgary, the city of Calgary has this list of actions individuals can take to limit climate change, rated from 1 to 5, with 1 being a good impact and 5 being the greatest impact. And so in the context of where we live, actions with the greatest impact tend to involve our homes. So things like installing solar energy or retrofitting a building envelope are each rated 4. Buying renewable power is rated 5, greatest impact. Whereas things including driving an electric vehicle, biking or walking, taking public transit, and even eliminating your commute by working from home, those have an impact of 3.
In other words, because we have dirtier heating and electricity than other places, we can make a bigger impact by focusing on our homes rather than our transportation.
Yeah, homes and,
Right.
and buildings as
And
well, like the
buildings.
buildings behind us.
So the biking still makes a difference, but if you're sort of thinking proportionally in your life, a bigger impact could come from other things.
Yeah, and for a city decision maker, biking might seem somewhat small.
Right. Yeah, if they're looking at if they really want to like hit the big numbers, biking wouldn't be the place to go.
So all this to say, we sort of went down a bit of a path to say that citywide emissions are going to vary significantly depending on where you live. The Government of Canada says provinces and territories that are the most populated, have economies based on resource extraction, or are relying on fossil fuels to generate electricity will tend to have higher emission levels. And
Right.
Alberta obviously ticks all of those boxes.
So the takeaway from all of this
Yeah.
is that living in Alberta, we've got some big messes to clean up before we get down to the point where my bike ride is going to make a huge difference.
Yes.
Okay, yes, you were right. It is more complicated than I initially thought. Okay, so we established that there are maybe bigger messes to clean up before we get to cycling. But cycling can make a difference, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping all this sort of additional information I gave you helps you contextualize where your decision to ride your bike fits in. So
Right.
when we choose to forgo a vehicle trip and instead ride our bike, that's great.
Thank you for validating my entire YouTube channel.
I particularly like this sustainable transport hierarchy I came across and showed
Yes,
to
so
you.
this one.
So it's from researcher Dr. Ian Phillips at the University of Leeds and his co-authors, and it's from a paper on e-bike carbon savings. Okay, but from a city standpoint, if the city is looking at the most impactful actions they can take to reduce emissions, that's going to mean a lot of people walking or on bikes.
Right.
So how do you create a big shift in trips from vehicles to active transport?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's complicated, as you well know.
Yeah.
So bike infrastructure is part of the answer, and it's often quicker and cheaper for a city to build than, say, a transit system,
Absolutely.
as we know well in
We've
Calgary
seen that,
here.
yes, yeah.
And it does have a quantifiable impact on emissions. Another paper from a Canadian researcher shows for an increase of 7% in the length of a bicycle network, there's a reduction of close to 2% in greenhouse gas emissions.
Oh.
But it's not as simple as only building a better physical environment to support people on bikes. As you also know, there's behavior change involved, and that's really hard.
Right, sort of like the old idea that a livable, walkable, cyclable city is not just about bike lanes, it's about the entire construct of the city.
Look at the 2022 Global Bicycle Cities Index, which is a database ranking conducted by a European insurance company. Only 2 Canadian cities made this list of 90 most cyclist-friendly cities around the world.
Montreal,
Yeah.
Vancouver.
Guess what spots they're in? That's harder.
Out of 50?
90.
Out of 90? Montreal might be top 10.
Montreal is number 16.
Oh, and Vancouver then like 25?
37.
37, wow.
Those are good guesses, though.
But not that high on the list.
No, so they're both well known for their extensive bicycle infrastructure. Another guessing game for you. Any guesses on what bicycle usage is in these Canadian outliers?
Oh, in Montreal?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
I bet it's
Vancouver.
not that high yet. I'd say, I don't know, 10%?
18.2%.
18? Oh,
Montreal.
wow. Good
but
job, Montreal.
Vancouver?
Oh, like maybe 8 or 10?
7.
7.
Yeah.
Wow.
And compare that with the top ranked city on the index, Utrecht.
Utrecht.
In the
I was going to
Netherlands?
guess that one.
I beat you to it. Guess how high their bicycle usage is?
50?
51.
51. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's a big deal. That's a significant difference.
Yeah. And I think that's part of why here in North America, when it comes to how to decarbonize transport, we're seeing so much focus on electric vehicles. Getting someone to go from driving an SUV to driving an electric SUV is easier than getting them to stop driving and to bike instead. And of course, though, the easy answer isn't always the best answer. As researcher Christian Band has written about, even if all new cars were electric now, it would still take 15 to 20 years to replace the world's fossil fuel car fleet, and we do not have that much time to spare. The next few years are crucial.
Yeah.
And he calls cycling 10 times more important than electric cars for reaching net zero cities.
Right.
So
Right.
go bikes again.
It's a systemic change. You often hear this conversation around climate change that individual action can only do so much. This is where we're into the conversation about systemic change is needed.
Yeah.
It also seems so easy to me for cities to say electric cars will make a bigger difference in cycling because it takes the responsibility off of them and puts it on individuals again. So they don't have to do the hard work of thinking about what kind of city we want in the future. They just sort of offload all of it onto consumers.
Because roads already exist.
Yeah, because it's easier,
Yeah.
but maybe not better. Okay, interesting. So after all that, I'm not sure how to feel. It sort of feels like, is the bike commute actually making a difference to climate change at all?
So yes, let's go back to sort of your original question that started all of this. How much of a difference does riding my bike actually make to climate change? So you'll remember the carbon footprint
Yes,
calculator.
but I'm slightly below the Canadian average if I was to drive a car.
If you were to drive a car,
Yeah.
13.63 tons. And so I did some calculations for you based on if instead you bike to work every day, which is what you do.
Which is what I do, yes.
And that drops your footprint down to 11.45 tons. So just over 2 tons of difference, and that's just replacing driving to work with biking to work on that carbon footprint
Well, that's
calculator.
something. That's not nothing. That's not a huge drop, but it makes a difference.
It makes a difference. And I do think it's worth noting that there's so many more benefits beyond just reducing greenhouse gas emissions to cycling, as you and I have both experienced.
Yeah.
Reducing motorized vehicle use has other environmental benefits. It decreases urban air pollution and traffic noise, and those are both linked to health, and air pollution is a major global issue The World Health Organization says the combined effects of ambient air pollution and household air pollution are associated with 6.7 million premature deaths annually.
Right.
So those are also things that are part of driving a
Yeah,
car.
and this is air pollution that's not around carbon emissions. It's just like the smog that gets into your lungs and makes you sick. Right.
So I don't think you need to feel too bad. I like the United Nations Environment Program summary of cycling and its benefits. The authority calls cycling more than a low carbon mode that enhances urban quality and facilitates social cohesion.
Social cohesion.
Big benefits. They say bicycles are also cheap and flexible, meaning people in low and middle income countries can participate in the economy and community, access education, healthcare, and other services. And the UN highlights even more benefits. Cycling leads to a longer and healthier life. It has a positive impact on mental health and well-being, and it saves money both for the people riding and for cities, given the lower infrastructure costs compared to other modes of transport.
Thank you for making me feel better about it. Those are all true. I believe all of those things. Those are all reasons that I ride too.
Yeah. And my takeaway personally from all of this is to keep on biking, especially when a bike trip can replace a car trip. But when it comes to making a difference to climate change, don't stop there. Let's try thinking broader than our own individual bike trips. And I think that can look like a lot of different things. Maybe it's about getting involved in local politics by volunteering on a campaign or speaking up at a council meeting, because those politicians can meaningfully impact how a city grows and how people move in it. Maybe it's about getting involved with your local bike organization that's advocating for cycling in your city to be safer, widespread and accessible, or maybe it's finding an organization that helps more kids and youth get on bikes and discover the benefits of two wheels. Or maybe it's a YouTube channel to get more people on
Get
bikes.
more people, yeah, absolutely. So any little bit helps.
Yeah, climate change is one of the major challenges, if not the major challenge of our time, and it's going to take actions from all levels, individuals, cities, and society to tackle it.
Yeah, and it does feel like on a personal level for me, climate change feels like this giant thing that I have so little control over, and being able to ride a bike just feels good sometimes. Like knowing it does make a difference helps, but sometimes it can feel overwhelming. This does make me feel a bit more empowered. Well, that was a bit of a journey.
Yeah,
And
a bit of a journey.
You know, it's interesting, when I started this, one of the reasons I started this was because whenever I ask people, and I do this a lot, why they ride a bike in a city, like almost nobody would say climate change. And 10 years ago when I would ask people why they rode a bike, almost nobody said climate change. Still, it's not that many people. Most people say they ride a bike for health reasons, or because it's faster, or it's more efficient, or more predictable, or cheaper. It's starting to be more people who say climate change as well. So it's interesting now, like this is great. All of your work here has made me think that it is definitely a motivator, or it could be a motivator, or it can be a reason for riding your bike. But when it comes to climate change, there's much bigger things we need to think about as well. Yeah.
Yes, let's do it all.
That's the takeaway. Okay, Kaylin, thank you very much for all of that work. Great to have you back.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. See, I told you it was a more complicated and nuanced question than we thought. So if you just skipped ahead to the end of the video for one key takeaway, let it be this. Yes, you should ride your bike because it's good for the climate, but no, it's not the only thing we should be doing. And what's most important beyond individual actions like riding your bike is big systemic change, which we all need to be working toward. So yeah, get on your bike, happily enjoy it. Not only is it good for the environment, it will make your life better in so many ways. And enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.